You know, when we think about the 1980s and technology, we usually think about success stories, right? Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all these guys who made billions and changed the world. But what we don't talk about are the other guys. The ones who were just as smart, just as visionary, who created revolutionary gadgets that should have made them legends. But instead, they lost everything. Some of them went bankrupt overnight. Others had their reputations completely destroyed. And one of them just disappeared and nobody really knows what happened to him. So tonight I want to tell you about 5 tech geniuses from the 80s who had it all and then watched it all fall apart. So Clive Sinclair. If you're not British, you might not know who this guy is, but in the UK in the early 80s, he was basically their Steve Jobs. This guy was a legend. Back in 1981, Sinclair had just released the ZX80 and ZX81. These super affordable home computers that basically brought computing to the masses in Britain. We're talking about computers that cost like £100, when everything else on the market was thousands. He sold millions of these things, millions. By 1982, he released the ZX Spectrum, which became the gaming computer in Europe. If you grew up in the UK in the 80s, you had a Spectrum. It was like the cultural phenomenon. Sinclair was a millionaire, he was famous, he was knighted by the Queen. Sir Clive Sinclair. The guy was on top of the world. But here's the thing about Sinclair. He wasn't satisfied with just computers, he had this bigger vision. He wanted to revolutionize transportation. He believed that the future wasn't cars, it was small, efficient, electric vehicles. And in 1985, he was ready to prove it. He spent years developing this thing called the Sinclair C5, and on paper, it sounded amazing. It was this small electric tricycle, right? You'd sit in it, really low to the ground, and it would be powered by this electric motor. No emissions, super cheap to run, perfect for short trips around the city. Sinclair was convinced this was the future. He invested everything into it, and I mean everything. He put in 12 million pounds of his own money, which in today's money is like $40–50 million. He was all in on this thing. January 10th, 1985. Sinclair launches the C5 with this huge media event. Press from all over the world, he's so confident, he's telling everyone this is going to sell millions, this is the future of transportation. And then, people actually saw the C5, but here's the problem. The C5 was tiny. Like tiny, you sat in this thing so low to the ground that you were basically at the same height as a dog, in British traffic, with trucks and buses everywhere. Do you see the problem? The top speed was 15 miles per hour, it had a range of about 20 miles, but only if you weren't going uphill. If you hit a hill, the motor would give up and you'd have to pedal it like a bicycle. In the rain. Oh, and speaking of rain, Britain is famous for rain, right? The C5 had no roof, no doors, you were just exposed to the elements. In January, in Britain, the press destroyed it. Like, absolutely demolished it. They called it a death trap. They showed videos of C5s getting crushed by trucks. One newspaper ran a headline that said Sinclair's folly, and it just stuck. Sales were supposed to be in the tens of thousands. They sold 5,000. Total. Sinclair had projected this thing would revolutionize transportation. Instead, it became a national joke. Within 6 months, Sinclair's company was in serious financial trouble. By the end of 1985, he had to sell his computer business, the thing that made him famous, just to try to cover the losses from the C5. He sold it to Amstrad for basically nothing. And Clive Sinclair? The man who had been knighted, who was a national hero just a year earlier, he became a laughingstock. People would literally point and laugh at him on the street. His reputation was completely destroyed. He spent the rest of his life trying to rebuild, trying to create new inventions, but nothing ever worked. He never recovered from the C5, and when he died in 2021, every single obituary mentioned it. The C5 became his legacy. Not the ZX Spectrum, not the computers that brought computing to millions, the C5. The failure. And that's the thing about the tech industry, right? One failure can erase decades of success. Sinclair proved that computers could be affordable. He changed an entire industry. But all anyone remembers is the C5. Okay, story number 2. This one is wild because it involves a phenomenon that's literally named after what happened. 1981. A guy named Adam Osborne, British guy who moved to America. He creates something that's never existed before. The first portable computer. The Osborne one. Now, when I say portable, I don't mean like a laptop. This thing weighed 24 pounds. It was basically a sewing machine-sized computer with a tiny 5-inch screen. But here's the thing. You could carry it. And in 1981, that was revolutionary. Before the Osborne one, if you wanted a computer, it sat on your desk and it never moved. Osborne said, what if you could take your computer to meetings? To clients? What if you could travel with it? And people lost their minds. The Osborne one came out in April 1981, and it was an instant hit. It cost $1,795. Expensive, but way cheaper than most computers at the time. And it came with all the software you needed already bundled. Word processor, spreadsheet, everything. Within a year, Osborne Computer Corporation was selling 10,000 units per month. The company was valued at over $100 million. Adam Osborne was on the cover of magazines. He was the golden boy of Silicon Valley. So here's where it gets interesting. By 1983, Osborne is working on the next generation. The Osborne Executive, better screen, better specs, everything people wanted. It's gonna be amazing. But there's a problem. The Osborne one is still selling. It's making the company millions. They need to keep selling it while they finish developing the Executive. So in early 1983, Adam Osborne does something that seems smart at the time. He starts pre-announcing the Osborne Executive. He's doing interviews, showing it off at trade shows, telling everyone how much better it's gonna be. He's building hype. And here's what happened. Immediately, sales of the Osborne one stopped. Why would anyone buy the old model when the new one is coming out in a few months? Everyone just waited. Except the Executive wasn't ready. It was still months away from shipping. Maybe 6 months, maybe more. So suddenly, Osborne Computer Corporation has no money coming in. Their inventory is piling up. Dealers are canceling orders. And they've got payroll, they've got manufacturing costs, they've got debt. The company went from 10,000 sales per month to basically zero overnight. September 1983, barely 2 years after the company started, Osborne Computer Corporation filed for bankruptcy. They owed $45 million. The company that was valued at over $100 million was just gone. And this phenomenon, selling a product too early and killing your current sales, they named it after him. The Osborne effect. It's taught in business schools. It's what every tech company tries to avoid. Don't pull an Osborne. Adam Osborne lost everything. His company, his fortune, his reputation. He tried to start other companies, but nobody would invest with him. The guy who created the portable computer industry, destroyed by one mistake. He ended up in India, kind of disappeared from public life. He had a heart attack in his 60s, partially recovered, but he was never the same. He died in 2003, mostly forgotten. And the really dark part? The Osborne Executive, the computer that killed the company. It was actually really good. If they had just waited, if they had just kept quiet for a few more months, they might have survived. But that's the thing about the tech industry. Timing is everything. All right, story number 3. This one makes me genuinely angry because it's about a guy who literally invented something that we all use today, but almost nobody knows his name. Jerry Lawson. He grew up in New York, moved to California in the 60s, and in 1976 he did something that had never been done before. He created the first video game console with interchangeable cartridges. Think about that for a second. Before Jerry Lawson, if you bought a video game console, it played one game. That's it. You wanted to play a different game, you had to buy a whole new console. Lawson said, "That's stupid. What if you could just swap the games?" He was working at Fairchild Semiconductor, and he led the team that created the Fairchild Channel F. It came out in 1976, and it was the first console where you could buy different game cartridges and switch them out. The first one. This is the technology that made the Atari 2600 possible. The NES, PlayStation, Xbox, everything. Jerry Lawson invented the concept of game cartridges. He should be as famous as Steve Jobs, but he's not. And here's why. So the Channel F launches in 1976, and initially, it does okay. Not amazing, but okay. The technology works perfectly. The cartridge system is revolutionary. Game developers are interested. But then in 1977, Atari releases the 2600. And Atari had something Fairchild didn't: marketing budget. Massive marketing budget. They flooded TV with commercials. They got into every store. They had better games, more games, exclusive licenses. Fairchild tried to compete, but they just couldn't keep up. And here's the thing. Fairchild was a semiconductor company first. Video games were a side project for them. When the Channel F started losing money, they didn't fight for it. They just gave up. By 1979, Fairchild discontinued the Channel F. They stopped making new games, stopped supporting it, just killed the whole division. And Jerry Lawson? They basically pushed him out. He tried to tell them, "We can compete, we just need better games, better marketing." But the executives didn't care. To them, video games were a failed experiment. They wanted to focus on semiconductors. So they shut it down, and Lawson was done. 1980. Lawson leaves Fairchild, and he's determined to prove he was right. He starts his own company, Videosoft. His plan is to make games for the Atari 2600, show everyone that he still knows what he's doing. And the games were good, like genuinely good games. But here's the problem. Lawson was competing against massive studios with huge budgets. He was a small independent developer trying to break into an industry that was already getting crowded. He poured all his money into Videosoft. Everything he had saved from Fairchild, he developed multiple games, tried to get distribution deals, but it was impossible. The market was saturated. Stores wanted big names, not some independent guy from California. By 1981, Videosoft was dead. Lawson had lost everything. His savings, his company, his shot at proving himself. And the really painful part? He was watching Atari make billions. Lawson spent the rest of his life working regular engineering jobs. He never got rich, he never got famous. When the video game industry would talk about pioneers and innovators, they'd mention Nolan Bushnell, Ralph Baer, all these other guys. Jerry Lawson's name was just forgotten. It wasn't until the 2000s that people started recognizing what he did. The International Game Developers Association finally gave him an award in 2011, recognizing him as a pioneer. But by then he was dying of complications from diabetes. He passed away in 2011, at 70 years old. And here's what kills me. When he got that award, he gave this interview where he said he had no regrets, that he was proud of what he created, even if he didn't get credit for it. But you could see it in his eyes, man. You could see the sadness. He invented something that became a multi-billion-dollar industry, and he died basically broke. That's not fair, that's not right, but that's the tech industry for you. The people who actually invent things don't always get the credit. Okay, story number 4. Now this one is interesting because you probably do know this guy's name, Nolan Bushnell. He founded Atari. He basically created the video game industry as we know it. Pong, the Atari 2600, all of that was him. But what you might not know is what happened after Atari. Because Bushnell had this amazing run in the 70s, founded Atari in 1972, sold it to Warner Communications in 1976 for $28 million, became this legendary figure in Silicon Valley. He was the guy. Steve Jobs worked for him. Everyone wanted to be Nolan Bushnell. And then, he lost it all. Multiple times. And the way it happened is almost impressive in how badly it went wrong. So after Bushnell sold Atari in 1976, he was rich, he was famous, and he was bored. He wanted his next big thing. And he found it Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah, Chuck E. Cheese. That was Bushnell's idea. He called it Pizza Time Theater, and the concept was genius. Combine arcade games, pizza, and animatronic entertainment. Kids would love it, parents would pay for it, boom, money machine. And at first, it worked. By 1981, Pizza Time Theater was huge. They were opening locations everywhere, the company went public, Bushnell was back on top. He was being called a genius again. But then in 1983, the video game crash happened. Arcades started dying. And Pizza Time Theater was basically an arcade that served pizza when nobody wanted to play arcade games anymore. Nobody wanted to go to Chuck E. Cheese. Sales collapsed, the company was bleeding money, and Bushnell made it worse by expanding too fast. He'd opened hundreds of locations right before the crash. Now he had all these empty restaurants, all this debt, and no customers. 1984. Pizza Time Theater filed for bankruptcy. Bushnell lost his entire investment, millions of dollars, and the company got bought by Showbiz Pizza, their main competitor. Bushnell was out. Again. Now most people would take that as a sign to maybe slow down. Not Bushnell. He was convinced his next idea would be the big one, so he started company after company after company. 1985, he started Androbot, a robotics company. It failed within 2 years. 1987, he tried to launch a new restaurant chain called Lion & Compass. It failed. 1988, another tech startup called Buy Video. Failed. 1989, tried to create a talking children's toy company. Failed. Every single one of these ventures Bushnell poured money into, and every single one crashed and burned. By the early 90s, he'd lost basically all the money he'd made from selling Atari. Gone. $28 million gone. And here's what's really dark about this. People started avoiding him. In Silicon Valley, if you fail once or twice, that's okay. It's part of the game. But if you fail 10 times, people start thinking you're cursed. Investors wouldn't take his calls. Banks wouldn't give him loans. Bushnell became known as the guy who used to be successful. Past tense, the has-been, the cautionary tale. Through the 90s and 2000s, Bushnell kept trying. He'd start a company, it would get some press because of his name, and then it would quietly fail. Over and over and over. He tried to get back into video games with something called UWink, Interactive Restaurant Gaming. It failed. He tried to launch an online gaming platform. It failed. He tried to create an educational software company. It failed. And the thing is, Bushnell is still alive. He's in his 80s now. But when people talk about him, they always talk about Atari, about the 70s. Nobody talks about the 40 years after that. Because the 40 years after that were just failure after failure after failure. He went from being the founder of the video game industry to being a guy who couldn't get a meeting in Silicon Valley. And according to interviews he's done, he still thinks his next idea is going to be the big one. He's still convinced he's going to have another Atari moment. But it's been 50 years and it hasn't happened. That's the dark side of being a visionary. Sometimes you have one great vision, and you spend the rest of your life chasing that high, trying to recreate it, and you never do. Gene Amdahl. If you study computer science, you know that name. Amdahl's law is taught in every university. This guy was one of the chief architects of the IBM System/360, one of the most important computers ever made. In the 1960s, Gene Amdahl was one of the smartest people in computing. Period. But in the 70s, he had a falling out with IBM. He wanted to build faster computers, better computers, but IBM wouldn't let him. So in 1970, at 48 years old, he did something crazy. He left IBM and started his own company, Amdahl Corporation. And his plan was simple: build computers that were faster than IBM's and sell them for less money. Take on the giant. David versus Goliath. At first it worked. Amdahl Corporation released their first mainframe in 1975, and it was legitimately better than IBM's. Faster, cheaper, more efficient. Companies started buying them. By 1979, Amdahl Corporation had captured 10% of the mainframe market. 10% against IBM, that's insane. Amdahl himself became wealthy again. Not IBM wealthy, but comfortable. He was proving that you could compete with the giants. He was a hero in Silicon Valley. The guy who stood up to Big Blue and won, but then things started going wrong. Early 1980s, he was convinced IBM was sabotaging him, that they were stealing his designs, that there were spies in his own company, and maybe he was right to an extent. IBM absolutely did not like what Amdahl was doing. They had their lawyers looking for any way to shut him down, but Amdahl's reaction was extreme. He started changing the locks in the building constantly. He'd have meetings where he'd accuse employees of being IBM plants with zero evidence. He became impossible to work with. The board of directors tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. In 1979, the board forced him out of his own company. Gene Amdahl, founder and chief architect, was pushed out of Amdahl Corporation. They gave him a severance package and told him to leave. 1980. Amdahl immediately started a new company, Trilogy Systems. His plan was to build supercomputers using revolutionary chip technology. He raised over $200 million in funding. Huge money for the time. But the technology didn't work. The chips kept failing. Manufacturing was a nightmare. By 1984, Trilogy Systems had burned through all $200 million and had nothing to show for it. Complete failure. 1987. Amdahl tried again with another company, Andor International. This time he wanted to make low-cost mainframes. It failed within 3 years. 1995. One more attempt. Commercial data servers. It failed. With every failure, Amdahl became more reclusive. He stopped doing interviews, stopped appearing at conferences. People in the industry started worrying about him. And then in the early 2000s, Gene Amdahl just disappeared from public life. He wasn't doing interviews. He wasn't publishing papers. People who tried to contact him couldn't reach him. There were rumors. Some said he was living in the Midwest somewhere, completely cut off from the tech world. In 2015, there was a brief update. He was alive, living in California, but he wasn't seeing anyone from the industry. His family confirmed he was okay, but that he wanted to be left alone. Gene Amdahl died in November 2015 at 92 years old. And when the news came out, people in Silicon Valley realized they hadn't heard from him in over a decade. One of the pioneers of computing had just faded away. His obituary mentioned his work on the IBM system. It mentioned Amdahl's law, but it barely talked about the companies. And to this day, nobody really knows what happened to him in those final years. Did he regret leaving IBM? Did he regret starting all those companies? We'll never know. He just disappeared. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more to talk about. I'll see you in the next video.